3 weeks. That was the space between me and the wedding I had spent almost a year building with Rachel, and 3 weeks was still enough time for a life to be dismantled if the wrong information landed at the right hour of the night. I did not know that yet on the Tuesday she left for Cabo, but I felt something small and cold move through my chest when she zipped her carry-on shut in the hallway and told me, without quite looking at me, that her phone might be spotty because the villa the girls had booked sat on a cliff with weak signal. I asked her why the villa mattered when every resort in Cabo advertised Wi-Fi in every corner, and she laughed the way she always laughed when she wanted to skip a question, the laugh that started high and ended somewhere gentler, and she said the group had switched from a resort to a private house because her friend Brittany's uncle owned it and gave them the week for free. Free was a word Rachel used often when she wanted a topic closed. I let it close. We had been together for 3.5 years. I was 31, she was 29, and I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm that built out data centers across 4 states, which meant I lived my days inside spreadsheets and site visits and slept most nights in the small colonial we had bought together the previous spring. Rachel worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a leased sedan that always smelled faintly like sample perfume, and made more money than I did in a strong quarter. We had met at a friend's engagement party when she spilled a glass of red wine down the front of my shirt and then insisted, very seriously, that she owed me a replacement, which turned into a dinner, which turned into the rest of what I thought was going to be my life. When I proposed to her in the parking lot outside the first restaurant we ever ate at, she cried and she said yes, and she told me she had been waiting for the question since our second Christmas together. I believed her because there was no reason not to. The wedding was set for the 3rd Saturday of October at a restored barn an hour outside the city, and Rachel had planned it down to the color of the ribbon on the favor bags. Her mother was flying in from Ohio the week before. My brother Chris had already tailored his groomsman suit twice because he had lost weight for a marathon he then decided not to run. Everything was in motion, and I remember thinking, sitting on the couch the night before she left, that all of the moving pieces should have made me anxious and instead made me calm. Rachel curled against my shoulder that night and told me, in a small voice, that she was glad her friends were dragging her out of the country because if she stayed home she would just keep obsessing over centerpieces. I told her to go and forget about the wedding for a week, and she kissed the corner of my jaw and told me she loved me. I remember the exact moment. I remember the exact softness. I would spend a long time later trying to decide whether she had already made her decision by then. The next morning I drove her to the airport before dawn. The sky was the color of iron, and she was quiet in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone with the brightness turned all the way down. When we pulled up to the departure's curb, she leaned across the console and hugged me for a long second and told me she would text as soon as she landed. She did not. She texted almost 7 hours later, a short note that said the villa was gorgeous and the group was already at the pool and she loved me, followed by a heart. I responded and told her to have fun. I meant it. I still meant it that night, and I meant it the next day, and I even meant it Wednesday afternoon when she went almost 13 hours between messages and then apologized and blamed a group excursion to a beach on the Pacific side. But sitting alone in my kitchen that Wednesday night, I started remembering things I had not let myself count before. The trip to Nashville the summer before, where she had come home with a bracelet she said Brittany had bought her as a birthday present and could not explain when I asked, 3 days later, why the receipt in her purse had her own card number on it. The wedding weekend in Scottsdale for her cousin, where she had left her phone in the hotel safe every night and told me it was because the resort had a bad habit of pickpocketing at the pool, a thing I had never once heard about a resort. The Bachelorette weekend she had thrown for her best friend from college in Charleston, where she had returned with a hickey on the side of her collarbone that she had covered with a scarf for 2 days before she noticed I had noticed, and then blamed on a curling iron. Each of these things had been a small thing at the time. Each of these things had a story attached. Each of these stories had been the kind of story that ends with a laugh and a change of subject. I sat at the kitchen island and I counted them the way you count coins from a jar you did not know you were filling, and I put my phone face down and I did not text her again that night. My bachelor weekend was scheduled for the same span. Chris had rented a cabin at a lake about 2 hours north that our uncle used to own before he sold it in the divorce, and my closest friend Jake, who had known me since 8th grade and who was going to be my best man, drove up with a cooler full of steaks and a stack of poker chips he had bought at a gas station. We spent Friday night on the back porch with the fire pit going, and I told them both I did not want a strip club or a boat rented under someone else's name or any of the traditions I had watched other men fumble through in the last few years. Jake laughed and told me that if a bachelor party could be measured in cholesterol, ours was already legendary. Chris asked me if I was nervous. I told him I was not. He asked me if Rachel was nervous. I told him she was calm too, and he nodded and stared into the fire and said something I did not fully hear because my phone buzzed against the arm of the chair, and it was Rachel sending a picture of a sunset and nothing else. Saturday, I woke up early and fished off the dock with Jake. The lake was flat and gray, and neither of us caught anything worth keeping. Around 1 in the afternoon, I called Rachel because I had not heard from her since the sunset photo, and she did not answer. I called again at 3. She did not answer. At 4:30, she finally sent a message that said the girls had rented a catamaran and the reception was bad and she would call me later. She did not call me later. She sent another message just before midnight that said she was exhausted and going to bed. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I put the phone face down and went inside and told Chris and Jake I was turning in. And Chris looked at me with a look I would only understand later. A look that said he had already noticed everything I was trying not to notice. Sunday morning was when the call came. Rachel was scheduled to fly back that evening, out of Cabo at 7 their time, which meant she would land back home a little after midnight. I was making coffee. Jake was still asleep in the loft. Chris was on the porch reading something on his phone. My screen lit up with a name I recognized but had not expected to see, which was Katie, one of Rachel's 4 bridesmaids and the friend Rachel had known the longest. Katie was a teacher in the same district Rachel had gone to high school in, and the two of them had been close since they were teenagers. She had helped Rachel pick her dress. She had helped Rachel pick me in a way I only later understood, when she had told Rachel after our 3rd date that I was the kind of man Rachel needed to stop pushing away. I answered the phone and Katie said my name in a voice that had already been crying, and my stomach dropped an inch inside my body before she had finished the 2nd syllable. Katie told me she had been awake all night trying to decide whether to make the call. She told me that if she did not call, she was going to spend the rest of her life watching me marry a woman I did not know, and she could not do that to either of us. She told me the words in a rush, so fast that I had to ask her to slow down and start over. She started over. She told me that Friday night the group had gone to a rooftop club in Cabo San Lucas, one of the ones the concierge had recommended, and that Rachel had been drinking but not more than anyone else and had spent most of the night dancing with the group and laughing and taking pictures. That was the innocent part, and I remember thinking she was building up to something and I remember bracing. She told me that around midnight a group of men had joined the dance floor near them and one of them, a tall man in a white shirt, had spent almost an hour standing close to Rachel and buying rounds and touching the small of her back every time he leaned in to talk. She told me she had tried to intervene twice. She told me Rachel had waved her off both times and told her she was being paranoid. I asked her what happened next. Katie stopped talking for a second, and I heard her swallow, and then she told me that around 1:30 in the morning she had watched Rachel and the tall man walk to a hallway near the bathrooms and stand there talking for a few minutes and then kiss. She said the word kiss. She said it clearly. She said it was not a small thing. She said it was not a brush of a mouth in the dark. She said Rachel had put her hand on the back of his neck and pulled him toward her, and it had lasted long enough for Katie to realize she was watching it happen, and then long enough after that for Katie to understand that she was going to have to make a decision about what to do with what she had seen. I asked her if anyone else had seen it. She told me 2 of the other bridesmaids had been at the bar getting drinks and had missed it entirely, and the 4th bridesmaid had been on the dance floor with her back turned. Katie had been standing near the coat check, waiting for Rachel to come back from what she had assumed was a bathroom trip, and she had seen the whole thing from about 15 feet away. She told me she had taken out her phone and taken a picture without thinking, the way people take pictures of car accidents on the highway, out of some instinct she could not explain. She told me she had waited until she was alone in her room in the villa to look at the picture on her screen, and then she had cried for 2 hours because she knew what she was going to have to do. She sent it to me while I was still on the phone. My screen buzzed and I pulled the phone away from my ear and I opened the message. The photo was slightly grainy because the club was dark and Katie had not used the flash, but the 2 figures were unmistakable. Rachel was wearing the emerald dress her mother had bought her for her birthday, the one with the low back that she had modeled for me in our bedroom 2 weeks before the trip. Her hand was on the man's neck. His hand was on her waist. Their mouths were pressed together and her eyes were closed. Behind them, the neon sign of the club spelled out a word in Spanish I could not translate. I looked at it for a long time. I looked at it until my coffee went cold on the counter next to me. Katie was still talking, softer now. She told me Rachel had come back to their table about 20 minutes after the kiss and had acted as if nothing had happened, and that she had not seen the tall man again, and that she did not know how far the encounter had gone before Rachel returned. She told me she had not slept since. She told me Rachel was still asleep in the villa right then because they had all stayed up drinking until the sun came up, and that their car to the airport was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and that she had 6 hours to decide what to do before Rachel woke up. She told me she was sorry. She told me twice. I told her she had done the right thing. I sat on the couch after we hung up and I looked at the photo on my screen for what felt like an hour and was probably 4 minutes. Chris came in from the porch and looked at me and did not ask any questions. He waited. I turned the phone toward him and he looked at the photo and closed his eyes for a second and then handed the phone back and asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to cancel the wedding before Rachel boarded the plane. He asked me if I was sure. I told him I had been sure since the moment I saw her hand on the back of that man's neck. The thing that happened next surprised me more than anything else that weekend. I did not fall apart. I did not throw the phone across the room. I did not go outside and scream at the sky. I made a list. I sat at the kitchen table of my brother's borrowed cabin with a legal pad Jake had brought up to keep score of the poker games we never actually played, and I wrote down every vendor, every deposit, every reservation, every family member who needed to be told. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the band, the rehearsal dinner restaurant, the honeymoon flights to Portugal, which I had booked in my name and paid for out of the savings account I had been building since college. The block of hotel rooms downtown for the out-of-town guests. The transportation. The officiant. Everything. I started making calls at 9 in the morning. The venue coordinator was already at the barn setting up for a Sunday brunch event and picked up on the second ring. I told her the wedding was canceled and I understood I was forfeiting the deposit and I did not need her to explain any of the fine print because I had read the contract when I signed it. She was quiet for a moment and then she told me she was very sorry. I told her I was too. The caterer was harder to reach, so I left a voicemail and followed it with an email. The florist answered on her cell phone from the passenger seat of a car and told me she could pause the order that afternoon if I confirmed by 2. I confirmed by 9:30. The photographer did not answer, and I sent him a written cancellation because I did not want any ambiguity about the date of the decision. The honeymoon was the strangest one. I sat with the phone on speaker while a customer service representative with a soft accent walked me through the cancellation policy of the resort in the Algarve where Rachel and I had planned to spend 8 nights. Most of the money was non-refundable. I told the representative I was aware. I told him to cancel it anyway. He asked me if I wanted to rebook for another date. I told him I did not. He processed the cancellation and read me a confirmation number, and I wrote the number on the legal pad next to the name of the caterer I had not yet reached, and I circled it twice for no reason I could name. While I was making the calls, my phone kept lighting up with messages from Rachel. She had woken up. She had seen missed calls from me from earlier that morning, which I had made and hung up on before I even knew about the kiss, just checking in. She sent a photo of the pool. She sent a photo of a coffee. She sent a message asking if I was up. I did not respond to any of it. I made the calls in order. I did not answer her, and I did not turn my phone off because I wanted her to see later the exact times of the calls and the exact times of her messages and the exact silence between them. Chris drove me home around 11. Jake stayed at the cabin to close it up. Neither of us talked much on the drive. Chris asked me twice if I wanted to talk, and both times I told him I did not, and both times he nodded and turned the radio a little louder and let the highway do the talking for us. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly the way Rachel and I had left it 3 days earlier, which felt somehow obscene, as if the walls did not yet know what had happened. Chris helped me carry in a bag and then he sat down at the kitchen island and watched me do the next part. I went upstairs and I started packing Rachel's things. I did it carefully. I did not throw anything. I folded her dresses the way she had folded them in the closet, and I stacked her shoes in the boxes the shoes had come in, and I emptied her drawer in the bathroom into a clear plastic bin, so she could see the shape of everything at once. I took down the framed photograph of us at the pumpkin patch that hung above the dresser, and I wrapped it in a hand towel and put it in the top of one of the boxes because I did not want to be the person who broke a picture out of spite. I worked for about 3 hours. Chris helped me carry the boxes down and stack them in the front hallway. I called her parents around 2 in the afternoon, right around the time Katie had told me the car to the airport was scheduled. Her father answered. I told him the wedding was canceled. He asked me why, and I told him I would let Rachel explain it in her own words because it was her story to tell, but that I wanted him to hear from me directly that the decision was mine and it was final. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me he was sorry. Then he asked me if there was anything he could do, and I told him there was not. He asked me if I was safe, which was a question I had not expected, and it was the moment on the phone when I almost lost my composure. I told him I was safe. He told me he was sorry a second time before we hung up. I called my own parents next. My father did not ask any questions. My mother cried and then stopped crying and told me she had never fully trusted Rachel and that she had been afraid to say anything, which was a sentence I would think about for weeks afterward. I told her we would talk more later. I called my aunt, who had traveled twice already to help with dress fittings. I called the 2 friends who had already booked flights to be there. I sent a group text to a list of about 40 people I had compiled that afternoon from the wedding spreadsheet Rachel had built and shared with me a year earlier. The text was 3 sentences. It said the wedding was canceled. It said I appreciated their support and their understanding. It said I would not be answering questions about the reason. Rachel called me from the airport in Cabo around 3 in the afternoon. She was crying. She had checked her email and she had seen the cancellation confirmation from the honeymoon company, which had copied her because her name was on the reservation, and she had understood in a single second what had happened. I did not answer. She called 4 more times before she boarded. I did not answer any of them. She sent a text that said, "Please pick up." She sent another that said, "I do not understand." She sent another that said, "Whatever she told you, it is not what you think." She sent one more that said, "I love you." I read all of them. I did not respond to any of them. Chris sat on the couch and watched me not respond, and he did not tell me I was doing the right thing because he did not have to. Katie sent me a message around 4 in the afternoon local time. She told me Rachel had boarded the plane and she had watched her walk down the jet bridge, and she had not said anything to her because she did not know what to say. She told me she was going to fly home on a different flight the next morning because she could not sit next to Rachel for the entire trip back and pretend everything was normal. She told me she was sorry again. I told her, and I meant it, that she had done the only right thing anyone in that entire group had done that weekend. Rachel landed a little after midnight. She drove straight from the airport to our house without stopping at her parents', even though I had assumed she would go there first. I heard the car in the driveway and I opened the front door before she reached the steps, and I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed because I did not want her to come inside. She stopped on the walkway and she looked at me and she looked at the boxes stacked behind me in the hallway, and she started to cry so hard that she had to sit down on the low brick wall that lined the front garden. Her suitcase was still standing upright behind her on the driveway. She tried, in the 10 minutes we stood there, to give me every version of the story she had rehearsed on the plane. She told me she had been drunk. She told me she had been overwhelmed by wedding stress and had not been thinking. She told me the kiss had been a mistake she had regretted the second it ended, and that she had cried in the bathroom of the club for 20 minutes afterward, which was a detail Katie had not mentioned to me and which I did not believe. She told me nothing else had happened. She told me she had not gone home with the man, and I believed that part because Katie would have said so. She told me the kiss was the entire betrayal, and she said it as if the size of the betrayal was what should have mattered. I told her that the size had never been the point. I told her the point was the choice. She asked me who had told me. I told her that did not matter. She asked me if it had been Katie. I did not answer, and she read the answer in my silence. And I watched her face change into something colder for 1 full second before it went back to grief. I made a note of that second in my head. It was the moment I understood that Rachel, in the middle of what she wanted me to believe was the worst crisis of her life, still had the capacity to be angry at the person who had told the truth. That second told me more than any of the tears. I did not let her inside the house. I carried the boxes to her car myself because I did not want her walking into the hallway. She stood on the driveway and watched me, and she did not offer to help. When the last box was in the trunk, she asked me if she could have 1 hour to talk. I told her she had already had every hour she was ever going to get. She asked me if I would go to counseling. I told her no. She asked me if I would think about it for a week. I told her no. She asked me if I still loved her, and I told her that whether I did or did not was not the thing that mattered, because the thing that mattered was that I did not trust her, and I would never trust her again, and I was not going to build a marriage on top of a foundation I had already watched crack. She stood there for a long time. She finally got into the car. She sat in the driver's seat with the door open, and she cried for another few minutes, and then she closed the door and she drove away. That was 1:30 in the morning. By 8 the next day, the story was already moving through both of our families. Rachel's mother called me at 7 and left a voicemail asking if we could talk. I did not call her back. Rachel's father sent me a short text that said he understood and he wished me well and that Rachel would need time and so would I. My mother came over with a casserole around noon, which was a thing I did not think people actually did until she did it, and she sat at my kitchen island and told me she had been awake since 4 in the morning thinking about how proud she was of me for not marrying someone I could not trust. I did not cry until she said that. She held my hand for a while. Chris came over that afternoon and helped me carry the last few things Rachel had left in the garage to the curb, and Jake came over that evening and made me eat. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. Rachel did not come to the house again. She sent letters. She sent flowers to my office, which I redirected to the receptionist. She sent a long email that I read in full because I felt I owed her that, and which contained a version of the events in Cabo that was designed, I could tell, to make me feel like the kiss had been an isolated incident brought on by a specific combination of alcohol and pressure. I read the email 3 times. I did not respond. Around the middle of the second week, a friend of mine named Dan, who worked with Rachel at the pharmaceutical company, called me and told me he had heard something at work that he thought I should know. He told me Rachel had been telling people at the office that I had canceled the wedding because I had become obsessed with a rumor a bridesmaid had made up. He told me she was telling people the bridesmaid, who he did not name but who I understood was Katie, had been jealous of her for years and had finally invented a story to sabotage her. He told me the story was gaining traction because Rachel was very good at telling it. He told me he wanted me to know so I could decide what to do. I called Katie that night. I asked her if she had told anyone else what she had seen. She told me she had not. I asked her if she still had the photograph. She told me she did. I asked her if she still had the location data on the photograph and she checked, and she told me she did. I asked her if she would be willing to send me the original file, unedited with the metadata intact, and she said she would. She sent it within an hour. The metadata showed the time and the location and the date, and it matched the story exactly. I did not send the photograph to anyone. I did not need to. I called Rachel's mother the next day, which I had not done since the cancellation, and I told her, without emotion, that I had a photograph of what had happened in Cabo, and that I did not want to hurt Rachel or the family, but that if the story Rachel was telling continued to spread, I would be forced to defend myself with the truth. I told her I was not making a threat. I told her I was making a request. I told her I wanted the rumors about Katie to stop, because Katie had done nothing wrong and did not deserve to be the person the story landed on. Rachel's mother was silent for a very long time. She told me she would talk to Rachel. She did. The rumors stopped within a week. Rachel sent me one last email, and it was different from the others. She did not defend herself. She did not ask for another chance. She told me she was sorry for what she had said about Katie. She told me she was sorry for what she had done in Cabo. She told me she understood I was not coming back. She told me she would leave me alone from that point forward. She kept her word. I did not see Katie again until almost a month later. We ran into each other by accident at a coffee shop near her school, and she was surprised to see me and I was surprised to see her, and we sat at a corner table for 2 hours and talked about nothing important. She told me she had lost 2 other friendships from the bridesmaid group over what she had done, because 2 of the other bridesmaids had sided with Rachel and had cut her off. She said it without self-pity. She told me she did not regret the call. I told her I did not either. We started meeting for coffee once a week. Then twice a week. We were not dating. I was very clear with myself about that, and I was clear with her, and she was clear with me. What we were doing was slowly learning how to be around each other without the shadow of Cabo in the room. She was funny in a way I had not noticed when she was only Rachel's friend. She listened in a way that I only later understood was a skill. 3 months after the cancellation, I asked her if she wanted to have dinner instead of coffee. She said yes. That was the beginning of something I did not name for almost a year. There was one more piece of the story that I did not learn until much later, and it changed the shape of everything that had come before. About 8 months after Cabo, Katie and I were driving back from a weekend at Chris's cabin, and she told me, quietly, looking out the passenger window, that Cabo had not been the first time. She told me that Rachel had kissed other men on other trips over the years and that Katie had known about at least 2 of them and had not told me because she had been convinced every time that it was a phase and that Rachel would grow out of it before the wedding. She told me she had been carrying that guilt for a year. She told me she was telling me now because she did not want to build anything on top of a secret. She apologized. She cried. I told her the truth, which was that if she had told me any of it before Cabo, I would not have believed her, and I would have resented her for telling me, and it would have destroyed something in me anyway. I told her the only reason I had believed her about Cabo was because I had already been ready to believe it, because some part of me had already known. I told her that the other kisses did not change how I felt about her. They only clarified how right I had been to walk away. We got engaged the following summer at the same lake where I had spent my bachelor weekend, on the same dock where Chris had asked me if I was nervous and I had told him I was not. I asked her at sunset because it felt honest, and I did not give a speech because I did not need to. I told her that she had told me a truth that had cost her almost everything and that I had watched her tell it and I had watched her lose friends over it and I had watched her never once try to profit from it, and that I wanted to spend the rest of my life next to a person who could do that. She said yes before I finished the sentence. I slid the ring onto her finger and I realized, standing on that dock, that the worst day of my life had also been the day the rest of my life had started. I do not think about Rachel often anymore. When I do, I think about the second her face changed on the driveway when she realized Katie had been the one who called me. I think about that second more than I think about the kiss in the photograph, more than I think about the emerald dress, more than I think about any of the words she said in any of the emails. That second told me who she was. The kiss had only told me what she had done. There is a difference, and understanding the difference is the reason I did not spend the rest of my life mourning a marriage I never had. I built a different one instead, on top of a different foundation, next to a person who had shown me, in the worst week of both of our lives, exactly who she was.